Of all the things that I have ever spent time, energy, and money on reviewing, this is the first product I've ever reviewed because I was forced to. So, because you made me, today we're going to talk about the RXM. We did a 6,000 round review on a Gen 3 Glock clone that Ruger decided they were going to take a stab at. Now, as the name implies, Ruger manufactured it and Magpul designed it. And boy howdy, when I started to look at what was available on the internet as far as information for this thing, I noticed that a whole lot of people did not have a whole lot to say. So, because it's a Gen 3 extended relative in the Glock family, we're going to lead off by talking about its compatibility and how compatible it actually is with the Gen 3 ecosystem. We're going to talk about its feature set and how it impacts you, and along the way we're going to discuss problems that people have decided that they were going to invent while talking about this thing. Because I gotta say, when this product was announced, I could not have possibly cared less, but now that I've shot 6,000 rounds through it, I can eat some crow and say, I understand why you guys have made me do this. So let's go ahead and get down to business. Now, I've noticed that the vast majority of reviews for this thing are in the hundreds of rounds rather than the thousands of rounds. The vast majority of anyone else that goes over hundreds is in the 1,000 or so round count total, and only a couple reviews that are out I have noticed have actually gone over the 1,000 round mark. Even still, I've noticed that the vast majority of stuff that is out there doesn't actually talk about the specifics related to exactly how compatible the RXM is to the Glock ecosystem. And personally, I'm going to lead off with this because I personally view this as the most important aspect of why it is that you would consider this in the first place, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, before we talk about the frame, because that's where the vast majority of the issues are really going to come from, here I'm going to talk about the slide, because the slide is more or less a one-for-one. Whatever Gen 3 slide components you want to throw in this thing are 100% compatible with the slides that are present. This, at least to me, is the most important aspect of this, because when we start talking about its fire control unit in the frame and that sort of thing, a lot of people are making a big fuss about trigger availability and that sort of thing, and while I understand that, we also need to understand something else. The vast majority of trigger jobs that are out there, and I do use some aftermarket trigger stuff, all, for the most part, share one specific thing, and this is the part that you feel the most, because if you're shooting a Glock, you're technically shooting a double action gun, because as you press the trigger shoe, you are finishing the charging cycle of the striker and then releasing it. That would be two actions. So the vast majority of what you feel in a trigger job is actually in the striker spring. The reason why this is so important is that with the stock trigger that's in it, if you just throw in a lighter striker spring, it immediately feels like a Haley skimmer and it's all still safe. But now let's talk about compatibility as far as frames go. Now, a whole lot less is truly compatible with Gen 3 Glock stuff. Now, I recognize that certain guys have pieced together certain things here and there, but if we're just talking about being turnkey and 100% safe, the couple of things that I wouldn't mess with, at least at present, is anything that has to do with that fire control unit. Now, I recognize that there are guys within the aftermarket that are producing trigger kits for the thing, but at least at present, there seems to be a few issues with regards to tolerances. For instance, myself and my buddy Nick ended up with an RXM, and we started messing with a whole bunch of stuff to see what would and what would not work with these guns, because we thought, okay, maybe you can just piece together parts from Gen 3 trigger components into the FCU and maybe that'll work. Nick decided he was going to be a little bit safer and just go with a kit that Tactical Pontoon sells for the RXM. And unfortunately, it would seem as though the aftermarket doesn't quite have a handle on the tolerances required for different trigger kits and stuff like that to function. At least not yet. So I wouldn't mess with anything inside of there. If you want to lighten the trigger on the thing, just throw a lighter striker spring in there, and again, just like I said, for the most part, it feels almost identically to a Haley skimmer. But the positive part to this is that I can still put a slide lock lever that I want in there, and I can also put a magazine release button that I want in there, so at least there's that. Now, there's something else here that I could recognize as a thing that I need to bring up and talk about, because people have asked me questions as far as compatibility since well before I was even able to finish shooting the thing that required number of bullets before this review. And the two things that were brought up the most actually puzzled me the most. The first one being, hey, I heard that there are issues with the RXM and OEM Glock magazines. Can you shed some light on that? And I can by simply saying I exclusively used either OEM OEM Glock magazines or a pile of 6 KCI magazines, the modern ones that KCI decided to turn over to me for a review. I'm not done with those magazines yet, but what I will say is that as far as reliability, function, failure to over-insert, things like that, I've never had any issues with these magazines functioning in this gun at all. Matter of fact, this isn't even a thing that I would think to bring up, because had it not been brought to my attention, I wouldn't have even brought this up as a possible factor within this review. That's how completely forgettable and non-issue-esque that is. And as a note, by the way, depending on the day, I've got something like 35 Glock magazines that are made by Glock, and no such issue existed. The other question was asked of me the second that I mounted a ramjet to this thing, and a lot of people asked, dude, what generation ramjet was that? And that was just confusing to me, because it's a Gen 3 clone. I bought the Gen 3 ramjet, I installed it, had no issues with installing it, and from round number 1, there have been no issues with fitment or anything like that. So I actually had to go hunt down why it is that people are asking me this question, and I'm just gonna tell you right now, that isn't reliable information. The Gen 3 ramjet will just go on an RXM. No problems or issues whatsoever. So there we go. Those are the answers to the compatibility questions that I just see a lot of people not answering, and I figure that I would lead off with here. Alright, so I can't really talk about feature set without talking about how exactly we tested it and how we sort of staged things up as we went, because this is supposed to be a super modular type handgun, so we sort of wanted to put that to the test. How does it handle being upgraded or changed over time? So the first 500 rounds that we fired were just slick topped. No optic, no nothing, just a set of irons. Are the irons on? Are they functional? All of that. Then I fired 1,000 rounds with an optic mounted and without the ramjet. Following that, we completed the 6,000 round testing process with a ramjet added. So how the gun ended up is more or less as you see it now. And of course, in order to actually meet the 6,000 round count for the Defender XL and the ramjet that's on here, I have to shoot a little bit more on this, but more of that'll be coming this month. Point is how did it handle itself, especially with the feature set present? Well, we're gonna start with the irons on this thing. Now, the irons that you get are made out of steel. Super happy about that. They're on out the box. Love that too. And while it isn't my personal preference to have a tritium vial on the front sight, if you're gonna have sights like that that give you some sort of illumination when it's dark or in low light or whatever, a glowing front that tries to contrast a little bit to your white light that's gonna get mostly washed but you can still kind of see, in conjunction with a blacked out rear, is the kind of sight setup that you're gonna want to get if you're gonna use this sort of sighting system. So big plus there. And if you are only able to pick up the gun itself and no optics, this is actually a pretty good place to start. These are solid sights that you can use right out the box. They're on point of aim, point of impact at 25, no problem at all. And the added benefit to having the sights slightly raised to permit their usage as backup sights when you mount an optic for something with like an RMR footprint or with a lower optic deck. The added benefit to having raised but not quite suppressor height sights is the simple fact that if I'm down to using just these irons, I can use them for one-handed manipulations and stuff like that. These are actually a smart set of irons that I don't plan on changing at all, which honestly is value added here, because a lot of times to get a set of sights like this, you're usually spending at least another 60 to 80 bucks. So I quite like them. As far as the slide serrations are concerned, they work perfectly good, they grip nice and hard, and even though Glock 19 recoil springs are a little stiff, they're functional on either the front or the back end. So if I have to load the pistol under speed with the front serrations, I can absolutely do that, or if I need to use the rear serrations to do the same or fix a stoppage or whatever, they grip onto you, they hang onto you, and they don't get in the way. So I'm quite a big fan of this. The next thing that I would really like to highlight as well is that a lot of times when people are not manufacturing Glock barrels, a lot of people don't take into consideration that Glock barrels are actually very, very, very strong and also very, very accurate. The easiest way to attest to this is some of the best shooters in the country, or indeed the world, always have very positive things to say about Glock barrels and how they generally don't really like to use aftermarket barrels because there's almost no to no benefit or a counterproductive degradation in accuracy when someone else tries to plug a barrel into a Glock. The simple fact that this barrel that is not made by Glock is at bare minimum just as accurate as the OEM barrels that I've used in the past is honestly quite a positive thing. Now, something that the influencer crowd is going to go ahead and try and tell you is that the witness hole, which acts as a loaded chamber indicator for this barrel, is somehow a problem. problem, in that if you shoot the gun a lot, you're going to occlude the glass with all kinds of carbon and stuff like that. And I'm just gonna tell you right now, these people need to go outside. Because if you're using a red dot properly in the first place, you're not even really going to notice that that's happening because you're focusing on your target and not your reticle. And by the time that you notice that there's some carbon and stuff on your glass, you just take your shirt to it and like wipe it off. You're not gonna shoot your gun for 1,000 rounds and then just carry it willy-nilly without touching or looking at it. So the simple fact that this is brought up as some sort of problem is preposterous. The barrel is fine, and if you don't plan on adding some sort of compensator or whatever to the gun, the barrel's gonna just be fine. There's no issues with it, it's plenty accurate. Don't let these friggin' people try and tell you that the simple fact that there's a loaded chamber indicator is some sort of problem, because honestly, if your genuine view is that a loaded chamber indicator cutout on a barrel is a problem because it occludes your glass and therefore this somehow holds back the gun in any way, I mean, honestly, seriously, dude, you probably should just take the chair out of your room. It shouldn't face your bed in the first place, and it makes you weak. But now the big reason everyone wants to look at this, and that's the modularity of the optics mounting system. Now, this isn't the only pistol on the market that has done this sort of system. By now, a lot of people have heard that all it is a series of screws and holes, okay? All you gotta do is follow the directions, put the inserts that are provided as recoil bosses in the correct places, place the correct screws in the correct holes, you're good to go. Now, I've heard some other guys complain about how they could have set these optics significantly deeper, but the reason, at least I can put together anyway, as to why they didn't do this is simply because of screw depth. They wanted to make sure that people that are using provided screws from different manufacturers, that those screws would be able to get the correct number of threads into the slide without going too far and obstructing things like your extractor from working because of compression issues. I've heard people talk about the fact that this is raised up just a little bit higher by millimeters as if it's some sort of issue, and I'm gonna let you know right now, it isn't. It really isn't. Select the correct optic, place it on the slide, install it correctly, you're good to go. And the simple fact that you have the mounting options for essentially whatever is available on the market, minus something like an acro, is a big selling point to this particular handgun in the first place. So having gotten the chance to look at this, I can say for sure it's actually quite smart the way that they put it together, and more than anything else, it's a painless solution too. A lot of people claim to be optics ready, when in reality they're just ready for the optic they like, and the simple fact that this gives you a lot of different options for different optics that are available really leans into what they're trying to sell this as, and that's as a super modular handgun. So I'm pretty happy with this arrangement in general, and the fact that it's reliable and easy is a big plus to me. So now let's talk about this frame, because I actually have a lot to talk about as far as this frame is concerned, and a lot more than many people will realize. So I'm gonna lead off with something that nobody actually talks about. My two very favorite things about this frame have to do with its magazine well and its front strap, oddly enough. So leading off with what no one actually talks about, the front strap of this frame is actually angled ever so slightly, so as you actually grip onto the frame, it really loads into how your hands place pressure on the frame itself. And for those of you that understand how the principles of leverage and friction both come together, the simple fact that these are both angled in the way that they are actually lend this pistol to being far more shootable than it has any right to be. Now, Glock 19s have always been pretty shootable, but the one thing that you always see people talking about that they can never explain is how shootable this thing is out of the box. And I actually quite agree with them, because the very frame itself is allowing you to weaponize the geometry in your hands and really use the grip strength that you've got to leverage the gun properly, in addition to the fact that there's a single finger groove cut in right below the trigger guard. All this really does for you is help you lock that gun hand in real high, real tight, and with very little effort. Now, a lot of people have attributed to how flat this gun shoots straight out of the box to the fact that it's got really solid grip texture, and I honestly really disagree, because this is an EDC grip texture. There's nothing truly aggressive about it. I mean, like, at all. What this really does is that it is cut specifically in a way for you to use your anatomy to its highest possible effectiveness. In addition to this, the magazine well flares itself out into dimensions that are actually a tad wider than the carry magazine well that Magpul sells for Glocks. This makes perfect sense with the frame that they are trying to push on this for the size gun that it is as well. Never mind the fact that all you have to do is look at it. There's a carry magazine well embedded in this thing without having to bolt one on, so the reloads are going to gonna be real fast, without the need to have to add one on. And the cool part about the geometric cuts on the front strap and underneath the trigger guard itself is that now they don't need the Glock grip angle to assist with taming recoil characteristics, so they had the ability to straighten that out a little bit and make the presentation of the gun a little bit more pointy without suffering any losses in the recoil mitigation department. And in addition to this, they took pity on the guys that suffer slide bite from Glocks by adding in a stunted beaver tail that doesn't get too obnoxious or large, so that simply drawing the thing doesn't become an issue depending on the draw type that you have. So what you have is a gun that presents on target really effectively, that also allows you to control recoil passively without a lot of people even realizing it. The magazine well on the thing is nice and wide, and the outside edge flares pull your pinkies away so that guys that have larger hands don't get pinched by magazines. And we wrapped this up with a Gen 3 magazine release, and I understand why they had to go with this, but we wrapped this up with a Gen 3 magazine release that is both extended and recessed quite a ways to prevent accidental touch-offs. This magazine button is also dehorned a bit because the corners are rounded, and there's a thumb access cut into the frame that allows you to touch off the magazine release very easily. In addition to this as well, the texture that you do get goes significantly higher than a lot of other stock frames that are out there, and the texture that is there, while it isn't turbo aggressive, it does actually get the job done, because if this is supposed to be a multi-roll handgun, you kind of want to balance between how aggressive or not aggressive the grip panels are. Now, I personally like really aggressive guns, but not everybody is going to like that. In addition to this, I've noticed that a lot of people have referenced this as a gas pedal or a thumb shelf, or no. It's a reference point for your thumb, that's all it is. The ledge isn't aggressive enough for you to press into, and the traction that's there is just to simply let you know, hey, you're in the right spot. In addition to the fact that once the gun starts getting hot, the metal pin that's there also helps with the fact that, hey, I'm going to now need a reference, because I've done more shooting and I'm probably thinking about other things. So, that's a bit warm. That's exactly where I need to be. All of this is smartly placed because I've shot this gun in pretty high volume, and we also know what time of year it is, so there's more than one session that I'm walking around with a gun that is just perpetually super hot. Now, up to this point, I failed to mention that there were no trigger guard undercuts or anything like that. I recognize why they're not there, and that's mostly because not everybody really likes them, and I personally don't, because your leverage comes from the low and high contact points, not how high I can get my support hand up there, because guys that do that have a tendency to just try and crush with their hands. Now, you need good leverage and friction at the same time. That's how a solid grip works. But if you want undercuts in there, that's nothing that a Dremel can't fix. That said though, it's clear to me that the guy or guys that drew up the plans for this frame in particular have actually shot guns before, and instead of putting together things that everyone desires, they put together things that actually matter. So now let's talk about this trigger. Now the trigger that we've got here is kind of a fat shoed trigger that stacks up weight like any other Glock, and much like every other Glock ever, you can feel as you press through the shoe, you finishing the striker charging process and then releasing it. Now, as you do this, you obviously want a pretty straight to the rear press, or at the very least a consistent one. So I would like to direct your attention to the actual geometry of the trigger shoe itself. Now, when you look at the trigger shoe, you can actually see that it's got soft corners rather than sharp corners on the outside edges. What this allows you to do is to put consistent contact on the entire shoe, regardless of the trigger control technique or press method that you're using. Now, in the amount of shooting that I've done, it is really easy to get really good, solid, consistent contact on that trigger shoe, and it's really easy to shoot very accurately with it, and honestly quite fast too. Because the trigger shoe itself is nice and fat, and because the break is pretty close to a straight face for it, and because of the soft corners that are there, it's really easy to figure out where the break point in this trigger actually is, and it's even easier to figure out how to effectively reset it exactly where it resets, rather than overshooting that trigger shoe when you're trying to go faster. Now, we can talk about different techniques as far as aggressive trigger slapping and things like that, and while I could talk about that until I'm blue in the face, the point is that it's easily identifiable, it's easy to reset properly, it's easy to hit the brakes and figure out exactly where the break point is and fire the shot. And what puzzles me, and this is only puzzling to me because this is coming from people that front like they actually shoot guns, rounds, in which case, congrats, you're telling on yourself. I have heard over and over and over and over again that there isn't a super definable wall and that it has more of a rolling break than the glass rod that a lot of Glocks have when you try to use a Gen 5 trigger or a Gen 4 trigger or whatever. And clearly, these people have absolutely no idea how a Glock trigger works, because yet again, you are finishing the charging cycle for the striker and then letting it go. Mechanically speaking, every Glock trigger ever has a rolling break. You are just pressing a trigger shoe like dog shit. The simple fact that the geometry on this shoe allows you to feel the whole roll is actually a good thing, because you know when the gun is going to fire bullets. So when it's time to go fast, I don't care about that. When it's time to pump that left pedal and actually go from shooting much faster to shooting straighter, it's really easy to identify where everything is. And because of those traits, it lends itself, even in its stock configuration, to tremendous ease of use as far as getting real fast, real fast. Now, is it an open gun? Absolutely not. Is it the single action press in a double single action pistol that's been tuned up by somebody? Absolutely not. But for what it is, it's punching well above its weight, and I really do appreciate the design emphasis that went into this trigger shoe and this fire control unit specifically. Again, you can tell that people who actually shoot guns a lot were involved in a design process for this entire thing. So yeah, it's interesting that we spent quite a long time on the feature set talking about angles and all that stuff, but when you actually sit down, shoot the bullets, and evaluate the piece of equipment, you could be sitting here for quite a while. But now that we've talked about its feature set, let's go ahead and talk about its overall performance during the testing process, and we'll wrap things up. Now, as far as overall performance over the last 6,000 rounds, I can definitively say that this gun has been quite reliable. Now, over those 6,000 rounds, I had 8 stoppages. All 8 of them occurred after I added a ramjet, which makes sense, because I'm using 115 grain trash house target ammunition, and to start, the ejection on it's a little bit weaker, so you start fouling it up, you start introducing it to Mississippi sand, things like that, you're gonna run into a couple of stoppages here and there. What's interesting to note, though, is really only 3 of those happened organically. And the only reason why I say that is because of the 8, 5 had occurred because of a weak magazine spring, and once I got a couple of failures to feed from that specific weak magazine spring, I isolated which magazine it was, tried to test it again, got a few more, so of the 8 that had occurred, 2 had occurred from that weak magazine spring, and after I detected that, I found it, tested it, and got 3 more, and I'm like, okay, this magazine spring is dead, that's not a big deal. The other 3 happened with no other justifiable reason for doing so. Just had some sort of weak ejection, and that, of course, is the result of me using a ramjet in conjunction with non-permissive environments, shooting the gun a whole lot, not cleaning it a ton, that sort of deal. As far as cleaning it is concerned, I hadn't actually detail cleaned the thing at all since this whole process started. All I really did, because the gun was to be shot in high volume, and I don't like destroying things for the sake of destroying things, is at the end of these especially longer days, I would separate the slide from the frame, get inside the frame, spray a bunch of gun lube in it, put it back on the frame, lock the action in the rear, let it drip dry, and then wipe off the excess. If you want to call that a cleaning, that's fine, but that's the closest thing that I came to a cleaning during this entire process. Now, post this just to inspect to see if I had cracked or marred or burred anything. I took the gun apart, cleaned it up, made sure that everything was still working on the inside, and of course there were no issues because it's a Gen 3 Glock clone. So overall performance results in a 6,000 round test is exactly what you would expect. The thing runs fine, there's no issues here. So after all the time I spent trying to avoid this review because I had no interest in it to start, and because you people made me do this review, what are my overall thoughts? Well, if you'll indulge me for just a minute, I have a pretty good analogy for what this handgun really is. First and foremost, I'll just straight up say it, this is the Gen 5 Glock that we wish we got, because it's got the metal sights, the frame is very intelligently designed, and it has a lot of the little add-ons that a lot of people want and will go to other other people to get, but now for less, and it's backwards compatible to the largest aftermarket pool of spare parts on the planet. And as far as the handgun's overall purpose, honestly, if I were to bust out a nerd analogy, this thing is a Super Hornet. Now, are F-18 Super Hornets particularly excellent at anything, or the perfect match for any task? No, not really. There's stuff that does everything that they can do better, individually. But what it can do is ground attack. What it can do is intercept and fleet defend. What it can do is dogfight. What it can do is electronic warfare stuff, or command and control, or aerial refuel, or numerous other things I don't feel like you want me to get into. And of course, it can also land on a giant friggin' boat, which relatively speaking is pretty difficult because on the ocean that huge boat is a dot until you arrive on the deck. Point is that is this handgun. It has the ability to change itself to suit your needs, and the fun fact about this is that maybe the full-sized and Glock 26 size frames didn't come from Glock yet, but other people are already starting to make frames. For instance, there's already a company out there right now, I forget the name of them at present, but they are making a full-size frame that will fit this slide, so there's your metal-framed Glock 45 that's just there. The aftermarket is starting to evolve for handguns like this particularly fast because they recognize how expansive the Gen 3 markets is. So if you start providing frames faster than Magpul can, and if they're better frames, people are gonna go get them. Matter of fact, I'm probably gonna go get an aluminum frame for this just because an aluminum framed 45 sounds like it would shoot amazing. And from what I understand, this has the Gen 4 magazine release as well, so if you're into that, great. In addition to this, like I said, you can mount the ramjet to it with no issues. You can put whatever optic that you want on it without any issues. And as far as my individual purposes for this handgun in particular, yeah, I can absolutely see myself carrying this thing all over the place, A, and B, what it's going to end up as far as my job is concerned is it's going to be an optics host, because you guys have been trying to nudge me into reviewing really crappy optics on handguns for quite some time, which means while I've got the whiz-bang Langdon stuff and I'm doing the testing period for that, I also have a reason to come back to the Glock stuff, if nothing else, just to meme some crappy Siley optic from someplace that I mounted to this just so that you guys get to giggle for 20 minutes. And the thing is that it doesn't have to change its roles on the fly all the time anyway. It's meant to do exactly what you want it to do, even if you only ask it to get into those clothes once. So, like it or hate it, I think it's intelligently designed and it's here to stay. So, we'll see what the future holds for this, but I think that Ruger really knocked it out the park when they decided that they were going to manufacture these things. But that said, if you would like to come out and train with us, you can absolutely do that. We have classes scheduled out through December at present, and we are working out the process of throwing more on the calendar as this video is being made. We're going to places like Fitzpatrick, Alabama, Lebanon, Pennsylvania, Picayune, Mississippi, Huntsville, Ohio, and others. 4 classes like our regular weapons manipulation stuff, or a night vision course, or an advanced pistol course. Eventually, we're going to throw another vehicle class on there, etc., etc. If you'd like to support us through Patreon, you can absolutely do that as well. And if you'd like to get something out of that, $41 a month gets you as much of this open enrollment training as you could possibly handle, with only a couple minor exceptions for things like private classes, which we do. All you gotta do is contact us, and for logistically challenging classes, like that soft skin vehicle class that I just mentioned. In addition to this, we are unveiling Range Mom services, so in conjunction with everything that you can sign up for, if you shoot an email to us and say, hey, I'm going to this class, I am going to show up with $75 in hand and hand it to you. The benefits that you get are that now you just don't have to think about your breakfast in the morning, lunch in the afternoon, caffeinated stuff, electrolytes, or little snacks, so that all you have to do is focus on loading your magazines, training, and taking notes. It also allows us to virtually guarantee that you don't pass out from heat stroke or something. So if you're interested in that, you can absolutely take advantage of it. We sort of beta tested that in the last vehicle class that I taught, and listen, I'm gonna tell you something, she was keeping people alive with that, because it's Mississippi and hot. But if you don't want to do any of that, or if you want to and want to check out our social media stuff, links for all of this are in the description below. That includes our website, Patreon, all of that stuff, to include the new Discord that we opened not too long ago. And now that all the plugs are plugged, I'll just say this. Remember, guys, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Easy.